Hello everybody. JavaScript can sometimes grow to enormous sizes. When everything is one place, one particular file, well, it can start to be overwhelming and difficult to navigate through. To help maintain order, you can use something what is called a module. What is a module? A module is simply a file, a regular file, okay? It contains a smaller piece of code responsible for a specific task, okay? So, such as the visual appearance and operation of a button, for example. And just that button, and that's it, nothing else. So every module has its own function, and that module can be imported. What does it mean to import something? It means to transfer the functionality of one module to another part of the code. So it's like copying code from one place to another while maintaining readability, okay? So this allows you to create code that is easier to understand, but also easier to develop and maintain in larger and more complex web applications. For the purpose of understanding it, let's create everything firstly inside the app.js. Notice that I use the uppercase here because now we are creating something bigger. We're creating an application, and every file that will be connected to it also we start from the uppercase. This is like a standard for creating modules, okay? So let's go into the application.js and let's create here a function that will be responsible for showing our application, right? But we'll also for a second put here button, the header, and for example navigation, okay? So let's call it button. Here we will use the header, and here we will, for example, call it navigation, okay? And for the sake of this course, we've just put here, for example, return button, okay? Of course, you can imagine here that there is lots of code, okay? So imagine that in the button we have 100 lines of code. In the header we have, for example, 150 lines of code, and in the navigation we have got like 700 lines of code. And imagine that we have got here now lots of code, right? So when we are using the button here, for example, in the console log, like for example this way, right, we would need to always jump to the code that is responsible for something, and it takes time. It's also not cool because, well, if there is much more, right, there are no free functions, but imagine there are like 20 of them. This can get messy, right? You don't know what is connected to what, and that's why we want to split our main application into smaller pieces of code. So into what? Into modules, okay? For a second, let's invoke application here. As you can see, it's working fine. We have got an output here, and now let's split it. So what do we need to do? We need to create 3 files that will be responsible for button, header, and navigation. So let's create a few files here. So let's call the first one button.js. Notice that I use the uppercase. Then I will create another node that we will call the header.js, and I will create another one that we'll call navigation.js. And now we need to just put the code from here into what? Into here, and the header into here, and the navigation into here. So we split it into 3 modules, right? And will it work? Of course not. That's not how it works because, well, app.js doesn't know about existence of button.js, header.js, and navigation.js. We need to import it. It means that we need to download, right? We need to copy this into here using a specific keywords like import, and then we say what we want to import in the curly brackets, and then we need to say from where I want to import something, and then we need to specify the path to it. So we open the quotes, and then notice that we are right now having all the files inside the same folder. And we need to specify that we are choosing the file from the same folder. And this sign means, hey, choose files from the same folder. And afterwards, we put the name of the file that we want to import. So we want to download it. Okay, so this thing means import the button from here to here. And will it work? Of course not. Why not? Because we need to also say in the file that we want to import what is available for exporting. So we need to add a keyword before the function to say, hey, this function you can import. For example, here another function here can't be imported now. Okay, you can import from the button.js only this thing. We say this is available for importing. And now, will it work? No, it will not work. Why is that so? Because we need to go into the index.html and say that our type of script is module, okay? And now we can easily see that it's working, right? We have button here. So we imported this from here. So the importing is like, copy it from here to here, and it's like here, but it's in another file. So we organize it into a better to read code right now. So we need to repeat the same thing for what? For the header and for the navigation. Remember that it's still not gonna work because we exported the button, but we didn't export the header, right? We need to export the header, and also we need to export the navigation. Now, we said that we allowed the function to be exported. That's why we can see the result. So now everything is in different separate files. So we have modules, right? We can now do things with our application from one single file. Everybody knows that it's in the app.js. But other things, the components like button, header, and navigations are specified in the separate modules, and that's cool. Okay, that's not all in that lesson. Notice that we've used the keyword that is called export, not the export default. What's the difference? When you have got a single thing, like for example, in our case, header, it's not cool that we need to, use the curly brackets here. Curly brackets are used when you want to specify what you want to import from something. If in the file there is only one single thing, most time programmers do something what is called the default export, and you do not need to then use the curly brackets. So they add only the default after the export keyword. So it means that we don't need to use the curly brackets. So this is the only thing that you need to export from here. Now, as you can see, it's still working fine, but we didn't need to use the curly brackets. Okay, this is how most programmers do. But we need to remember that you can also mix the export and export default behaviors. What does it mean? It means that I could include here another function, like for example, skill. Let's return here skill. And I could say that I want to export this thing, but by default, I want to export this thing. And now it means that, well, what does it mean? Let's see. As you can see, it says that we need to specify the default one first. So let's specify it. And it works fine. Notice that we don't need to import everything, and that's also cool. We just chose the default option, right? But if you want to now choose skill and another function in the same import, then you need to add here the comma, and then in the curly brackets, you specify what you want to choose. Let's say that I want to choose only the skill function, right? You don't need to choose the another function. You can choose just skill. And of course, you can still have here another functions, another functions that you don't allow to export at all, right? So let's choose the skill, and of course we can use it here now. So like this, as you can see, we have good skill now. So you can mix the default export with typical exports, but most time people just use the default export for the sake of the files where you have only a single thing to export. Okay, you need to also know that some people do not put the export default here in this place before the function. Some people do it like this: export default navigation. You can put at the end of your file the information that you want to allow for exporting this function and in a default. So this thing is just gonna work when you remove the navigation from here. And as you can see, it still works fine, right? Now you might be wondering, why should I choose this over this? Well, to be honest, it's up to you. Use this or this, but stick to one, okay? So when somebody follows your code, he sees that, okay, you want to do it this way, I will know what to expect and where to expect it, okay? Choose one. I don't have any preference over this. Just choose one. It's good to know that sometimes you're gonna see your files imported like this. In our case, it's not gonna work because we are using the live server to, use modules. But some people might use a specific programs or libraries that will allow them to import like this. They don't need to specify the .js after the name of the file, okay? Because by default it's just .js, so it's just a headache to add it everywhere, and it doesn't increase the readability of your code. So if you see a code in future, for example in React, and you see something like this, just know that they are referring to the JavaScript file. Next thing is that we have a simple importing here, so everything is one file. But what if we put, for example, let's create a folder and let's call it components, and let's put the button into the components, right? So we're gonna move it. Notice that the cool thing about Visual Studio Code is it updated here the path, right? So we go from the application into components and then into button.js. So it's pretty straightforward. It's the same like when you are including the images, right, on your website using the image tag. When we move the application.js to the source file, what will happen? As you can see, we need to firstly use the 2 dots and the slash in order to move out from the folder that we are in. So we are like closing the source file using this, right? And then we move to, for example, header.js, or we close the source file using the 2 signs and slash, and then we go into the components, right? And then into button.js. Okay, as an exercise, try to do the same thing I did here, okay? This is pretty important because you need to just play with it at least once and you will get used to, creating modules. Create another file, call it, for example, footer, okay? Or, like, for example, footer.js, and also create here a function, import it, export specific function using the default export. Play with it. Remember, you need to practice. That's only the lesson.